Welcome, everyone, and thank you for coming. This morning I want to continue with this wonderful poem text that we began last week. For those of you who weren't here, they are recorded and they are available, I think, on our website. So therefore, I will not give too much new explanation for the text. And we often begin here, for those who are new, with questions and answers in the beginning. But because I want to get into the text, we'll take the question and answers toward the end. So this text is by this quite renowned master, 19th century master in Tibet by the name of Patrul Rinpoche. And again, last week I gave some explanation about him, renowned not only for his as a fully realized meditation master, but just a incredible knowledge of all aspects of the Buddhist teaching. So those things are kind of given. But he was also a very unique human being. Again, I think last week I told stories, but basically he lived impeccably. I mean, even though he was this renowned master, he never took any position in any monastery. He lived in total simplicity, slept wherever the night found him, refused any kind of offerings or positions, but just anybody gave him an offering, he'd give it to the next person who showed up. He was impeccable in his practice. He also, I think, which was unique, he also was part of a movement called the Rinpoche movement, which at this time in Tibet was a non-denominational movement. So even though he had come out of one of the major, the Nyingma, one of the major lineages in Tibetan Buddhism, he really saw that sectarianism was kind of eating at the fabric of Buddhism in his country, and really wanted to find the commonality and return to kind of the basics of Buddhism. So he was part of this Rinpoche movement. And this poem text that I'm reading again is a very unusual. It's entitled "Advice from Me to Myself." And most Buddhist teachings, Dharma teachings, are giving teachings. Here he is talking to that person who is supposedly practicing the teachings in a very personal way. In this sense, he's talking to himself. And as you will see, he's talking to himself in a very open, honest. Again, one could imagine that he knew himself so well, so he knew all the areas where one can practice or live inauthentically. But also he was a teacher and had probably had many hundreds, if not thousands, of encounters with people, so he knew people quite well. And again, even though this text is really focused, his advice to himself is somebody who outwardly or says he's practicing the path of awakening and enlightenment and practicing impeccably. So it's presented in the context of the Buddhist teachings. I think anybody, all of us, no matter what path we are teaching or non-path we are practicing in our life, I think this can be very meaningful. So I will just read what we covered last week. I won't comment on it, and then we'll begin where I think we left off. So again, this is called Advice from Me to Myself, Patrul Rinpoche, 1808 to 1887. And again, I'll just read these first couple of paragraphs that we did last week. It says, "Listen up, old bad karma Patrul, you dweller in distraction. For ages now you have been beguiled, entranced, and fooled by appearances. Are you aware of that? Are you? Right at this very instant, when you're under the spell of mistaken perception, you've got to watch out. Don't let yourself get carried away by this fake and empty life. Your mind is spinning around about carrying out a lot of useless projects. It's a waste. Give it up. Thinking about the 100 plans you want to accomplish with never enough time to finish them just weighs down your mind. You're completely distracted by all these projects which never come to an end, but keep spreading out more like ripples in water. Don't be a fool. For once, just sit tight. Listening to the teachings, you've already heard hundreds of teachings, but when you haven't grasped the meaning of even one teaching, what's the point of more listening? So are everybody up to date? And again, there was explanation, because again, there's meaning in all these things and different ways of looking at it. So, but we will continue. And in these next paragraphs, including this last one I read, he's talking about a very traditional formulation in Buddhism going back to the time of the Buddha, which is you hear the teachings, you reflect on the teachings, and then you meditate or practice. Those are the 3 steps. You don't just kind of jump in. You hear teachings, but that's not enough. You have to reflect, which means you really think about, digest. What does this really mean? What does it really mean to me? And then when you really understand the meaning in that intellectual, reflective way, then one deeply practices them. So again, he says, listening to teachings, you've heard hundreds of teachings, but when you haven't even grasped the meaning of one of them, why do you keep listening to more? And then he goes, reflecting on the teachings, even though you've listened. Okay, so now you've listened to the teachings. He said, reflecting on the teachings, if the teachings aren't coming to mind when needed, what's the point of more reflection? None. All right, so again, this is so important. If the teachings aren't coming to the mind when they're needed, when are the teachings needed? A lot of time, right? You know, when we're meditating and we think we're following some instructions, and then 5 minutes into our meditation, we're off and running, right? Throughout our life, our daily life, when we still find ourselves lost in the melodramas of life, still lost in emotional afflictions, still lost in anger and resentment or fear, anxiety, worry, fantasy, hurt, you know what I mean? This is when we need what? The teachings. Right? This is when we need this medicine for our mind. But if they're not coming to mind, and many of us know what that means. I was just talking to someone the other week who says they find it quite disturbing that they get up every morning, they do their meditation, they do their reflection, they do their reading, and then they get dressed, go out the door, and it's like, 10 hours just disappears. And all of a sudden, they're at the end of the day, and they realize all the things they had practiced in their home, the mind states they cultivate, the teachings they thought they reflected on, none of it was available during the day, and they were still running on their habit energy, the way they've always done it. So he's saying, this reflection, which means the reflection is this chewing over, this mulling over, that we really intellectually get it. We get it. Oh, it's like, let's say somebody and they're a little two-faced. You know what I'm saying? They act one way, but they are really the way they're thinking and behind your back, the way they act, the way they truly act and think. You may get fooled for a while, right? But if you really stop and reflect enough that you really get it, you get, this is who they are. And then you're no longer fooled by them, you're no longer taken in by them, you know just how to handle and respond to them, right? It's because you've gotten it. Before you haven't gotten it, you've either been constantly taken in, or once again you kind of give them the benefit of the doubt. You see, until you finally get it. And there's so many things in this life about ourselves, about other people, and about life in general that we just we reflect on, but we haven't gotten yet. We hear over and over and over everything's impermanent, everything's changes, sickness, old age, and death, it comes to everyone, right? Everything, we go, oh yeah, I understand that. Right? And we've said it 100 times, 1,000 times. And then when it actually is occurring in life, we are lost, we are upset, we are angry, we are disturbed, we are brokenhearted, right? It's again often because we just have not reflected to that level that when it happens, we understand what's going on because that reflection is now available. It has become part of me. Right? That's why I think the analogy of that the teachings, intellectually at least, have to be chewed on so they can be digested. Right? If we don't digest our food, the nutrition that is inherent in them will not become available to us. Right? If we don't chew our food. Well, so again, that is why it's so important that we don't just accumulate endless teachings, but that we stop and really reflect on meaning. Do I really get it? And if I get it, how does this apply to me in my real life? Right? Then, as he says, as life unfolds, the meaning becomes available to us. But many of us, we wonder, why is it that I've been practicing spirituality or Dharma or meditation for years and years, and I read so much, I got shut, and why is it still? Right? I am still driven by my habit energy, right? Still prey to all the kinds of mind states, that originally brought me into practice. It's a question to ask ourselves, and a lot of it is that this second piece we have skipped. Right? We hear, we get the instructions, we go practice. But we really don't get this other piece. So again, he's saying, if they're not coming to mind when needed, then why are we doing all this? Right? I've said it 1,000,000 times, I'll say it again. The Buddha said, I teach one thing, the cessation of suffering. Right? So he's very clear, right, that he's not teaching to make us better meditators. Right? He's not teaching to make us great pundits of spirituality that we can discourse greatly. Right? He's teaching it so we can stop the self-created suffering that we cause for ourselves and then we therefore pass on to others. And so, again, better to take a few teachings and practices, understand them well, reflect on them deeply, and really work on taking them into our life. Right? This is the proof of the pudding. And then he says, meditating according to the teachings. If your meditation practice still isn't curing the obscuring states of mind, forget about it. What is that? Forget about it. Isn't that like some TV thing or something? Forget about it. So, with translations, you never know whether the translator was actually searching for something in the American vernacular, or whether actually Patrul Rinpoche said that. But isn't this wonderful? It's sort of a continuation. So if we're meditating, and if your meditation still isn't curing the obscuring states of mind, forget about it. I was talking to somebody the other day who sits in meditation every morning for 1 hour and sits every evening for 1 hour. Right? And yet when this gentleman was telling me about his relationships with the people he lives with, they sounded horrible. Really horrible. If your meditation practice still isn't curing the obscuring states of mind. So again, with this gentleman, I tried to say, the practice is how you treat these people. That's your practice. And the meditation is a way that you begin to understand your mind better, so you are better able to relate to, the people you live with in an open, loving, caring, respectful way. Like, that's the practice. The meditation supports that. But he thought, what? It's all about meditation practice. It's not about, life. So this is very important. If your meditation practice still isn't curing the obscuring states of mind, forget about it. Now, in Buddhist psychology, a lot of the mind states and emotions are categorized as states of obscuration. You might come across that term. And it's very important because you might say, well, what is it obscuring, right? Obscuring means what? Can't see. Like having serious cataract problems, right? Well, in this tradition, going back to the Buddha, the true way things are essentially pure, undefiled. And this mind of ours is nothing else but a vast, spacious awareness. Right? And in that spacious awareness, wisdom and understanding and compassion naturally arise. Right? But if we don't see that, right? If we don't see that, if that vision, that capacity to see the way things are obscure, and all we see is what? The world of self, the world of petty narrowness, and the world of the dramas and melodramas that the I and the me and the ego are endlessly manufacturing for us, right? And that's where our energy is caught up. That's where our mental energy and that's where our emotional energy is caught up, in this endless drama of self. And in all the emotional afflictions that self will always put up, right? If that's where we are, if that's what we see, then the true nature of things is obscured. Is that clear? Again, the analogy is to a mirror. A mirror has the capacity of reflecting whatever appears in it just as it is, right? No obscuration, no distortion at all. The mirror reflects things just as they are, right? That's why many people don't like looking in the mirror. But if that mirror is covered with a layer of dirt, right, it will not reflect, right? The image will be obscured. Even though if we wipe that mirror clean, its capacity to reflect is still 100% present, isn't it? So for us to say, oh, the mirror no longer reflects the way things really are, is really incorrect, isn't it? The mirror still 100% has that capacity, but it is covered over. It is the covering that is preventing that mirror from shining. Is that clear? So in the same way, our minds as they really are, our awareness just as it really is always here. And always this capacity to shine brightly is always occurring. But again, it is obscured to us. We don't see it because we are the same way the mirror is covered with the dirt and the dust. Our minds are covered with this endless melodrama of self. He goes on. You've added up just how many mantras you've done, but you haven't accomplished. But you aren't accomplishing the visualization. You get the forms of the deities nice and clear, but you haven't put an end to subject and object. You may tame what appears to be evil spirits and ghosts, but you're not training the stream of your mind. So here he's referring to, in Tibetan Buddhism, very common practices, which is, let's say, mantras and visualizations. And traditionally, Tibetans like to count. You know, you count. You've done this mantra 10,000 times a day, 100,000 times a month, so you're counting, and then a lot of it, and then you're visualizing various deities, and you're trying to get them clear. All right, so he's talking about what is a very common, everybody practices it kind of thing. Serious practitioners, but also the lay people. This is what they practice. And he says, yeah, all right, so you've counted up your mantras, but you still haven't, got your visualization clear. All right, now you got your visualization nice and clear. You can see things clearly, but you haven't put an end to subject and object. So he's a profound teacher because he keeps going, what practice is really about. Practice is really about what? Getting out of the world of duality. I'm here, you're there. This is me, that's the earth. It's only when we live in a world of duality, of separation, of disconnection, that we are able to do the things we do. To other human beings, to the earth, because we don't see that we are the earth. The earth is us. I take care of the earth, I take care of myself. I harm the earth, I harm myself. Right? The suffering of another is my own suffering. But if I don't see that, your suffering is your suffering. Big deal. All I care about is that I'm not suffering. So he says, even though you're getting, again, he's profound because he's taking us beyond the world of forms, right? Many people will think, hey, I'm a great practitioner, right? Why am I a great practitioner? What? I say 10,000 mantras a day. My visualization is really clear and bright. Right? And he goes, so what? Do you still see separation? Is it still you visualizing these deities? And then when he says this thing about taming to appear to be evil spirits and ghosts, understand that Tibetan society, pre-Buddhist, was a shamanic society, and rather than kind of dismissing it, Buddhism kind of incorporated it. So you find a lot of shamanic elements often within it, and it was a society where people thought that many of the bad things that happened to people were the result of evil spirits, and so therefore there was a whole industry, just like in most shamanic societies, of certain shamans who would, their job would be, they were their master of ritual, right? And they would have the capacity of taming evil spirits, expelling ghosts, and all these things that people saw as the cause of problems in life. And so he's saying, all right, well, you may do all that, but you're not training the stream of your mind, which means what? You have ghosts and demons in your own mind. Right? That's where you should be taming. Right? Those are the ghosts that really do the most harm. So again, please remember, we are talking about a teacher that is highly revered. A teacher who is considered almost like a Buddha within his culture, a man deeply respected, a man who is deeply versed in all these teachings, right? So he's kind of pulling out the rug, isn't he? But in a very powerful way. So then he says, your 4 fine sessions of sadhana practice, so meticulously arranged, forget about them. Okay. So again, in Vajrayana Buddhism and Tantric Buddhism, traditionally one practices these sadhanas. These are kind of these meditation texts that would involve prayers and chanting and reflections and mantras and visualizations and various types of meditation, all and might involve various kinds of ritual instruments, right? So they're fairly elaborate practices of periods, and usually I think he's talking about people on retreat would maybe do this 4 times a day. So he's saying again, you may have your ritual table and all your instruments present. You may be able to go through your sadhana text perfectly, right? Getting all the inflections right, getting all the words right, getting all the visualizations right, getting all the bells and the drums right. Forget about him, he says. Again, he is doing something so important, so key, that we enter the spiritual path and we make it about how we're doing in terms of the practices, as opposed to the essential, which is, what are the practices transforming me? Right? The spiritual practice, a real spiritual life, is not about the mastery of practices. As he says, it is about the mastery of my own mind. It's about the clearing up of all the obscurations. That's what and all these practices are in the service of that. But if we're totally caught up in how we're doing with our practice, then we're making a fundamental mistake, which again I think he is talking about. He says, when you're in a good mood, your practice seems to have a lot of clarity. Right? But you can't relax into it. And in this tradition that he comes from at a deep level, this idea of relaxation, that the capacity of relaxing the mind and letting go and entering deeply is very important. So he's saying, your practice is going well. Oh, you got everything is very clear, but it's still outside you. It still hasn't relaxed. It still hasn't suffused your body mind. When you're depressed, your practice is stable enough, but there's no brilliance to it. So this is the other side. As for awareness, and now he's talking about this practice of what is called Rigpa, this practice of pure awareness. He says, as for your awareness, you try to force yourself into this Rigpa-like or fully aware state, as if stabbing a stake into a target. What he's getting at is, if you have a target, right? Let's say a bow and arrow target or something. It's kind of a fine. The arrow is small, and it goes in. He says, even our approach to something like doing a practice of pure awareness, it's like taking this big stake and just kind of driving through. He says, as if stabbing a stake into a heart, into a target. You're forcing yourself. And again, this is very much part of this what's called Dzogchen, a great perfection tradition, a tradition in Tibet that is very similar to what in other parts of Asia became known as Zen or Chan. But again, this sense of this naturalness of this aware, pristine mind, and that rather than pushing ourselves into it, right, trying to get it, trying to think there's something to grasp at, it's just the opposite. It's already here. I need to just relax at a deeper and deeper level to experience what's already present. And we know, like we talked earlier in the meditation instructions, we need to learn to what? To let go, right? everybody in here is working on letting go of something, right? Letting go has become part of our vernacular. It's not just Buddhists and meditators. I mean, I got to let go. I got to learn to let go more, right? I mean, lots of people talk this way. Letting go it means relaxing. Right? I gotta relax my hold, whether it's on a person, a situation, right? So there is this sense that relaxing, even relaxing the mind, not simply the body. Right. You know, there are lots of people, deep relaxation is now big, right? It's big time. Not just in meditation and yoga, but, relaxation is big. Relaxation training is big. I remember years ago when I was a mental health professional reading, this is probably 30 years ago, and I was already very familiar with Buddhism and yoga and stuff like that. Some psychologists had discovered something brand new that he basically had marketed. It was called the relaxation response, right? As if it was, And then there was another psychologist who patented this method. It had his name, which was kind of a full body relaxation. Right? I mean, it's, again, so this capacity to relax body and mind is well known for thousands of years, right? And this is very hard for us as Americans, because we think we come from a place of need and want and deficiency, and we think we need to get more and more, right? And happiness and fulfillment comes from getting more, whether it's more things or more status or more fame or more friends on Facebook or else even spiritual experiences. We think we got to get something, when actually Buddhism says the opposite. It says you already are a Buddha, right? Which is very much hard for many people to believe, because they don't experience themselves that way, right? But again, that is why Buddhas appear in the world. That is what they have discovered, that we are that way. And that is through this process of letting go, this purification that comes from letting go at deeper and deeper levels, that will be naturally revealed to us. Again, it's like somebody coming in who had knowledge of cleaning, and when you said, I got to get a new mirror because this mirror doesn't work, they say what? Get me a rag and some Windex. I want to show you something. It could save you a lot of money, right? Not having to get a new mirror, just using the old one. In the same way, this spiritual life of healing and transformation may not be as hard. Many people think, oh, it's so hard. Right? Healing and transformation, changing myself, is so hard, right? But it's really not. It's hard because we look at this stuff, our conditioning, our obscurations, as these solid, encrusted, things. And that we think that this purity of mind and body is somewhere far distant, right? Far away from someone like me. So it's hard for us to believe and trust that is actually a misperception, right? That these obscurations, these conditionings are not things of any great solidity. And when they are seen clearly and worked with in a skillful way, can easily be transformed. And that purity of mind, of seeing the way things are, is really not that far away. Continuing on. When those yogic positions and gazes keep your mind stable, only by keeping mind tethered, forget about them. Okay, so again, he's sort of just dissecting the whole realm of practice. Okay, and he's talking about yogic practices, which in Tibetan Buddhism and other forms of meditation path are also taught, not just in Hinduism. So he says, when those yogic positions and gazes keep your mind stable, he says, only by keeping the mind tethered, forget about them. Okay, so this again is a very key piece of Dharma. Yes, I just got a letter from somebody, an email from somebody asking me about this very same issue. And again, it goes really back to the Buddha himself, because what he discovered when he visited the meditation teachers of his time, the great teachers of his day, that what they were teaching, what might be called and referred to here as yogic trance, right? That these were yogis living far away from ordinary life, either by themselves or in these colonies of other yogis, and they devoted themselves to cultivating these trance states. And that in these trance states, they had all kinds of experiences, right? They had tethered the mind to one thing, and when they held that concentration single-mindedly long enough, they began to go through various kinds of meditative trance states, right? Which were quite wonderful. But the Buddha rejected that path even after he mastered it. Because again, like Patrul Rinpoche is saying, all one is doing is tethering the mind, right? And when the mind is tethered, it's sort of like if you have a dog, right? And when you have your dog on a leash and you have him tethered, he doesn't roam about anywhere, does he? He's a good dog, right? But what happens when you take him off the tether one day? Off he goes, right? So his compliant behavior, his peaceful behavior, is only because he or she is tethered. Is that clear? But it has not penetrated that dog, that self-restraint is its own. Is that clear? So by tethering the mind in various kinds of meditative trance states of concentration, while in the short run that may produce a sense of well-being and even a profound kind of understanding, usually when the yogi arises from that state and goes about, the ordinary operations of his conditioned mind will continue. This again shows us why there are people who have, again, very good meditation practices, right? In their meditation practices can feel very peaceful, very calm, very open. They can even discover that they have a wonderful, loving, compassionate heart that goes out to everyone, right? Until they get up from their meditation seat and go out into the world. And then they find that this peace and calmness that they had been cultivating in their meditation state is not carried over. And this compassionate, open, loving heart that they had cultivated on the meditation mat did not seem to relate to real people and real situations. Right. again, he's not saying that these type of practices are a waste, but he says they are, if they are going to be meaningful, they have to be meaningful in terms of that we are really entering into a process where real healing of those places within us that are wounded are healed, and that those places where we are stuck in our obscuring emotional responses, historical ways of seeing and acting and relating, if those places are not transformed, so what, he's saying. So what if we have a good practice, in quotes? He's a tough guy, isn't he? Patrul Rinpoche. And now he says, giving high-sounding lectures, we might consider what I'm doing right now a high-sounding lecture. He says, giving high-sounding lectures doesn't do your mind stream any good. I'll have to remember that. But this is important, right? Again, just because we can discourse in eloquence on spiritual subjects, if our mind stream is not in accord with that, if we are not living that and practicing that, again, so what? He says the path of analytical reasoning is precise and acute. So the path of analytical reasoning is, again, something, that's very highly regarded. This, especially in kind of monastic Buddhism, where there's a lot of emphasis on training the mind, the kind of thinking mind, the perceiving mind, to see clearly how things really are. He says, so the path of analytical reasoning is precise and acute, but it's just more delusion. Good for nothing goat shit. Again, most of us aren't familiar with goat shit, but I think we get his point. Right. So he's saying even this wonderful understanding of Buddhist psychology and philosophy that one knows so well, and one can analyze things so clearly from, at the end of the day, you're just piling up more delusion. Good for nothing goat shit. No, actually, he obviously didn't know about composting. Because we know that it may not be true that goat shit is good for nothing, but left to itself, it probably is good for nothing. So again, he's uncompromising. The oral instructions are very profound. Traditionally, in the meditative path, there are what called oral instructions. In other words, there's lots of teachings that are available through texts and all that. But traditionally, when one was working closely with a meditation teacher, the teacher would give one directly oral instructions, kind of direct kind of teachings. He says the oral instructions are very profound, and it was considered wonderful to be able to receive these profound oral teachings from a master, but not if you don't put them into practice. Reading over and over Dharma texts that just occupy your mind and make your eyes soar. Forget about it. Again, sort of like when I said last week about some other things, we have to understand, he's not saying do not read Dharma texts if we are following his instructions. But when we are just reading Dharma text, spiritual text, over and over and over, and all we're doing is just occupying our mind. We're reading these spiritual Dharma texts, meditative texts, just like we read works of fiction, just like we read the newspaper. We're just reading. We're just filling up our mind with more information that are just leaking out. Again, all we're doing is occupying our mind, and if we're doing it a lot, we're making our eyes soar. Forget about it. Any questions? Why don't we just stop here? Any questions about what you've heard today? Whether it's in terms of what is really being said here, but as importantly, what does it mean to you in terms of your life, your practice? Please don't be shy. Yes.
What strikes me with this teaching is the recognition of our own democracy, and how, I guess, just taking yourself too seriously is a real dangerous thing, and you miss an awful lot by doing it, and getting caught up with all the ABCs and ritual and all that. I met actually accepted Lama, and basically what he said is anybody can be enlightened from the monastery, constantly and meditating all day long, but he said you're really not effective Buddhist until you get up off your, as you said, get up off your seat to go out into the world.
Right.
And I just have a tendency. I see it with other, like say, religious traditions, where you have people, your Sunday Christians, person,
as opposed to your Sunday Buddhists.
Right. And then they go out and after going through all those emotions and activity and all that stuff, and then they go out and the next day, on Monday, they're knifing people in the back.
Right. So this is. I'm just going to repeat this because I'm getting the signal back there to repeat it. Yeah. So what is being shared is just an affirmation of how easily. It is for us to be kind of hypocritical, or for one to be hypocritical, but not even in a very conscious, deliberate way, just that there is this separation between the external, the forms of our path, and actually a willingness to authentically practice it. We are people that are very attuned to how we look to others. We are very conscious and aware of our image and how we want others to perceive us, how we wish to be perceived by others. Right? So here's this great master, right? Advice to me for myself. He's kind of revealing all his dirty laundry in public, isn't he? Right? Again, we who are reading it are kind of taking it into ourselves, but he wrote this about me. I mean, he could have called this advice from the master to the student, right? And it would have had a kind of a different emphasis, right? It would be, what a great master. He sees us so clearly. He sees all our hypocrisy, right? But he took if you can see, he took a very brave step, didn't he? He's talking to himself. He's calling himself on all of it. So, quite wonderful. 1, 2. Yeah. Nancy.
This is the most amazing teaching. I really am just enjoying this.
Good.
So much. But something you said a while back in the beginning, you said something about, because it has to do sort of with how I'm approaching things now. You said if you just take 1 or 2 things and you just, focus on that, maybe that would, sort of, to me, bring greater benefit than, trying to take on huge things. And it reminds me, when I first was introduced to Buddhism, I just was so enthralled with it that I had to read everything. And I read and bought all kinds of books. And he's right, it's just occupation for the mind, it's just more information. And I think it was an important phase to just kind of, but you know, it's really not, it really didn't result in so much transformation.
Right.
But what you said just now, I mean a little while ago, about taking two things was very, I don't know, it just really struck me in a way I hadn't heard before, I hadn't gotten inside me before.
So just for the recording, actually this is being live streamed to members who aren't here, so people are listening right now. Again, Nancy's just affirming her appreciation for this text, but also for that point that was made earlier in our talk today, about rather than having a kind of generic practice or a general practice, to take it and put it into specifics, right? And that taking a few practices and really getting good at them is better than taking on lots of practices that one has very limited experience or realization with. And you're absolutely right. I mean, in our community we do these intensives, and a lot of them, deconstructing the myth of self. I mean, we have many of them that are quite large, and they cover a lot of ground. But then this summer we're having a 2 months intensive called, I forget, what do we call it, personal something or other? Making it real and personal. And what that was about, with people chose just a couple of things that they wanted to really focus and work on in their life. And from what I'm hearing from the mentors is that people are having a lot of, not just a lot of success, but are really enjoying this, to kind of take these areas of their life, these specific relationships, or this thing about themselves, and to really give it 2 months of really real focus to really produce real change. So that's good. Thank you. Rick?
It's advice to myself, and he's, of course, a very advanced teacher. And I think there was some mention, maybe if you were giving advice to, in that context, traditional Tibetan peasants or something like that, would he give them the same advice, or is this advice sort of honed into someone who already has a lot of understanding and experience?
Yeah, again, I mean, what Rick, I can't answer. Oh, okay, I'm getting this thing. So the question is...
Speculating.
Yeah. So Rick's question is, even though this is very direct, it's very profound, because it's really pulling out the rug from kind of all the traditional practices that kind of ordinary agricultural-based, nomad-based Tibetans who were very devout, if they were reading something like this or hearing this could really undermine and be very, in a certain sense, difficult to understand. Again, you're right. One of the things that it's hard for us to believe or imagine, that when you go to traditional Asian societies, traditionally, there weren't bookstores in every corner. And that if you wanted a text, you basically got it from somebody, a teacher or something. I mean, in other words, you wouldn't, the monastery just didn't have a library. And here's all Patrul Rinpoche's, you see. I mean, but even to say, traditionally in Tibet, things were either written out by hand, which was quite laborious to copy, or else they would do woodblock prints, where they would have, carving the woodblocks. And I've seen them. I've been to Tibet, and and usually the printing process from woodblocks, they would print 50 or 100 or several hundred, and usually somebody would support that. So again, it's not as if these texts were available. Usually you got, especially something like this, from somebody. And so I would imagine you're absolutely right. It's hard to say. In his time, how widely available this text was. Again, I found it on the internet. Right? It's available to everybody. And just parenthetically, when I was in studying with my Tibetan teacher in the 70s, and he was teaching me. some what are called Dzogchen teachings on the nature of mind and things like that. And it was quite interesting because traditionally it's just like that. I mean, teachings that kind of undercut the kind of usual framework of the religiosity, again, were taught very directly from teacher to student. They were not, talked about widely. And when I told him that these teachings that he felt were only traditionally transmitted from teacher to student were, in books that anybody could buy, and that there were Tibetan teachers giving retreats or workshops on Dzogchen or the Great Perfection that anybody who paid money could, go to. He couldn't believe it. I mean, it was just, just totally different. But again, this is the age we live in. And the unfortunate thing, as we see, that we think just because we can read something or that we can hear something, that we really understand it. And we really know how to practice it. So that is why traditionally in all the meditative traditions, having a relationship with a teacher, that's why teachers give commentaries, and you'll see the Buddhist literature is full of teachers commenting because it explains what these things mean, but it also explains how to practice them. And so without that teacher, and again, I mean, this is not that profound. We know, we have teachers for everything. Even though in this day of virtual learning, maybe, they're going to do away with teachers. And but again, maybe that's okay for certain kind of learning. But something as personal and as intimate as what we're dealing with here, which really has to do with the transformation and the healing of one's own mind, not to have somebody who knows you, showing you how to practice these and evaluating how you're doing, you could see one could get into all kinds of trouble, right? On all sides. Yeah, so so that's a good point. Thank you. Yes.
Question from somebody online, referring to your discussion of forget about it. And she's asking, is forget it too strong? He's making the point that one needs to apply the teachings to one's life, but not forget them.
Again, he is, as I said, he's a tough guy. He takes no prisoners. He was deeply appreciated. I mean, again, as I said last week, there were still among the older Tibetans who came out of Tibet in this generation who had teachers who knew his disciples. I mean, he's not that long ago. He died in 1887. And he was well known. He did not suffer fools. He did not engage in small talk at all. It was, he was as supposedly he was as you kind of get a feel for him, right? And again, as Rick was kind of pointing out, and I was affirming, Buddhist teachings were traditionally given with an emphasis on who is the hearer. This is very important. I think I mentioned last week. That's why people can read various kinds of Buddhist teachings and they seem contradictory. And they're not contradictory from the point of view of the teacher or the Buddha. They're contradictory from the point of view of addressing different audience, different hearers, was making the teaching appropriate for that audience. So obviously, and as we continue in this, we'll see, he's talking for somebody who's practicing all this stuff and thinks they're what? Thinks they've attained something, thinks they're pretty good, thinks they're a good practitioner, right? So he's very meticulously just, cutting it down, cutting it out, right? And bringing them back to the essentials. So that's, we have to understand that in terms of that. And again, as we said earlier, to somebody who's just kind of beginning and just kind of, trying to, figure out, what is it, what is the, 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 what is the kind of building things up, you wouldn't be told at that point, let it all go. Hopefully, you're letting it all go because there's an attachment that is preventing you from really taking the next step. Yeah. Good. So we should probably stop. So we will continue next week.